Tin Hut! I want you to remember that no bastard ever got out of debt by only making the minimum payment. They did it by declaring absolute and total war on their debt. Any talk you may have heard about how being in debt means you're lazy or less responsible than anyone else is a lot of horse dung. The trust fund bastards who describe debt as a type of moral failure know as much about working for a living as they do about being in debt does not diminish your true worth as a human being. Now, you have the most spirit, the best strategy, and the greatest will to win. You should actually pity your debts. Your debts should be staying up at night worrying about you. Because you're not just going to pay off the bastards. You're going to tear out their guts and use them to grease the wheels of your 20-year-old used car. You're going to massacre your debts by the bushel. Debt is the enemy. Wade into it. Make it crawl. Grab it by the nose, then kick it in the ass. Attack your debt all the time until you run through it like through a goose. Now, some of you may be wondering whether being completely debt-free is worth all the sacrifice. Well, when you send in your last check and are finally beholden to nothing and no one, you'll know the answer. All right, you sons of bitches. You know how I feel. Now get to work. Hello, and welcome to the Communist Manifesto for Personal Finance, the only program that teaches you how to seize your means of production. I'm Comrade Rourke. In 2017, U.S. consumer debt surpassed $13 trillion. If we divided that amount by the total U.S. population, every man, woman, and child, sorry, Timmy, would each owe $43,000. Any way you slice it, America is a nation of debtors. What is the cause of all this debt? Millennial laziness? American secularization? China? There are a myriad of reasons why each individual ends up in debt. But if we look at things from a macro level, it's clear that the root cause of American debt is wage stagnation. Today, we have no better myth than the greatest generation. the generation that defeated fascist Germany and then reached new heights of prosperity simply by working harder and being more responsible than the successive weaker generations. It's a great story, but it's wrong. First of all, America didn't defeat fascist Germany. Communist Russia did. Look it up. Second, the greatest generation didn't build wealth simply because they were better at saving than the cuckolds of today. They built wealth because they had a booming post-war economy, government programs to help them afford college tuition and houses, and, most importantly, higher wages. In his book, Debtor Nation, Louis Hyman points out that in the years following World War II, Americans borrowed for the same big-ticket items we borrow for today. Houses, cars, washing machines, items from department stores. For you young people, department stores were like Amazon, but in real life. Just like millennial snowflakes, the greatest generation borrowed a lot of money to subsidize their standard of living. But unlike millennial snowflakes, Americans after World War II not only made their payments on time, but also saved a decent percentage of their income. Because during the quarter century following the war, wages kept rising to match the cost of living. So Americans could borrow, assuming their incomes would help cover the cost. And then came the 70s, the decade that brought so many terrible things into the world, like disco, bell-bottoms, and the movie Zardoz. It was during this decade that wages began to stagnate. Not only did wages stagnate, but the price of things like medical care and college started to rise exponentially. This caused the purchasing power of working-class Americans to decline, so people borrowed more to make up the difference. This process was helped along by capitalist pigs, who, seeing an opportunity to make obscene amounts of money, created things like home equity loans and credit cards to make borrowing easier than ever before. Of course, they didn't tell anybody about their predatory interest rates or what was really in the fine print, because the best consumer is an uneducated consumer. So the exploding debt crisis wasn't a result of millennials being bigger than the greatest generation. It was a result of wages not keeping up with inflation and the rising cost of living. But this brings up the question, what caused the wage stagnation? Many people have different answers. Capitalist pigs say, wage stagnation? There's no such thing as wage stagnation. What are you talking about? Why are you asking what my salary is? Look at this kitty. And fascists say immigrants cause wage stagnation because fascists are stupid bastards. For us at the Communist Manifesto for Personal Finance, the root cause of stagnating wages is obvious, and it's not because there was an economic downturn. Since the 1980s, the U.S. economy has seen enormous growth, minus recessions brought on by government incompetence and capitalist pig f***ery. Oink. The funny thing is, working-class Americans didn't see their share of this massive growth. In Broke, How Debt Bankrupts the Middle Class, Kevin Light describes how from 1987 to 1997, corporations saw their annual profits grow by 90%. Keep in mind, that's profits. In other words, the bonus money, as in the millions of dollars paid in bonuses to CEOs for doing jack. Meanwhile, back at the ranch home with the second mortgage, the median American family income rose by 1.8%. Looking at the data, it's apparent that the reason wages are stagnating is that the capitalist pigs are hogging the profits. Yes, I'm furious too. Now, why are we telling you all this? If you're thousands of dollars in debt, is this information helpful? No. Regardless of whose fault it is, your fault, their fault, nobody's fault, you're still the one ultimately responsible for getting yourself out of debt. Unless you're a billion-dollar corporation that constantly cheats on its taxes, the federal government isn't going to bail you out when you're broke. Is that fair? No. It's capitalism. But even if knowing the root cause of America's rising debt isn't helpful for your situation, it's still important, because it's the truth. Now, what you do with the truth is up to you. You can do nothing. You can vote for leaders who promote income equality. You can become a communist. Hint. But until a majority of us decide to change the system, the burden of our debt, and in all likelihood, the government's debt, will fall on us. And the only way we can get out of debt is to Anyone who's ever played the Total War franchise will tell you, when you prepare for a campaign, you need to focus on three things: intelligence, logistics, and diplomacy. The same is true for debt. So let's get down to brass tacks and discuss
Number 1. Intelligence.
Know thy enemy has been good advice since the beginning of warfare. Debt is your enemy. But how much do you really know about it?
Isn't all debt just money I owe somebody? How much more complicated can it be?
Very complicated.
Oh, bother.
We divide debt into two categories.
Secured
And
unsecured.
secured debt has
Collateral.
which is property your creditors can repossess, like houses and automobiles. Discussing the intricacies of auto loans and mortgages are programs unto themselves, so we're going to save secured debt for another episode. Our main focus is
Unsecured.
debt. Because you're not an idiot, you can probably guess unsecured debt doesn't have collateral, so your creditors have nothing to take back if you fall behind on payments. Instead, creditors will sell your debt to collection agencies, who harass and bully you into paying up. If that doesn't work, the debt collectors sue you in court and, depending on the verdict, garnish your wages. Examples of unsecured debt include
Credit cards. Medical bills.
and
Student loans.
if you're like many Americans, you may owe thousands of dollars in credit card, student loan, and medical debt all at the same time. And if you have multiple debts, keeping track of them can be a Herculean trial. To help you with this task, you should use the most exciting thing that has been or will ever be created by the human race: a spreadsheet.
A spreadsheet?
Yes, a spreadsheet. Look how awesome it is. You can write down who you owe debt to, how much you owe, what the minimum payment is, what the APR is, the due date.
Oh boy, the due date.
That's right, the due date. Also, if you're feeling adventurous, you can add stickers to your spreadsheet.
I love stickers.
Who doesn't love stickers? Cucks, that's who. Pull your thumb out of your butt.
Pull your thumb out of your butt.
Pull your thumb out of your butt. That's what I say, pull your thumb out of your butt. Anyway, once you fill out your awesome spreadsheet that's way more fun than a PS5, you're ready to focus on
Number 2. Logistics.
Among military personnel, there's a saying: amateurs worry about strategy, professionals worry about logistics, meaning a strategy is only as good as the supplies feeding your forces. Study military history and you'll find that the greatest armies crumbled because of a lack of supplies. What are the supplies needed to wage your war on debt?
Money.
Now for some of you, your income might be barely enough to cover all your necessities and the minimum payments for your debts. Some of you may be making six-figure salaries but are handling your finances so poorly you can't seem to get ahead. Whatever your income situation, before you embark on your campaign to get out of debt, it is imperative you do two things. 1. Form a budget, and 2. Put $1,000 in your emergency fund. Now we have 2 entire episodes discussing budgets and emergency funds, and we recommend you watch those if you want to figure out how to marshal your forces. Once you have a budget and $1,000 in your emergency fund, you can now worry about
Number 3. Diplomacy.
Military theorist Karl von Clausewitz defined war as a means to achieve political objectives. Your objective is to get out of debt as quickly as possible. To do this, we recommend using any legal method at your disposal, including negotiating with your creditors. Now, due to time constraints imposed by the Ministry of Information, we're not going into too much detail about negotiation. We recommend you read The Debt Escape Plan by Beverly Hartzog and The Road Out of Debt by Joan Feeney and Theodore Connolly to get a better idea how to negotiate with creditors. The main thing we want you to understand is that negotiating with your creditors can make your path out of debt easier. You may negotiate a lower interest rate, waive late fees, or a payment schedule that works with your budget. Now, will creditors and collection agencies bargain with you because deep down, they're actually nice people who are just misunderstood? Absolutely not. But they will negotiate with you because you have
leverage.
Debt collectors don't just want to collect your money. They want to collect your money as easily as possible. And what's easier, hiring an attorney and paying court fees for the right to garnish a poor person's wages, or negotiating with a debtor and coming up with a repayment plan that works for everybody? Now, we are by no means saying negotiating is a guaranteed success, or that collection agencies won't try to trick you, which is why we strongly recommend you visit the Federal Trade Commission's website at
ftc.gov
to learn your rights as a debtor. Also remember, when you negotiate, never, ever, ever agree to anything until you get it in
writing.
And when you get a written agreement, read every word. Once you have gathered intelligence, marshaled your income, and negotiated with your creditors, you're ready to begin your war of conquest. Of course, every campaign needs a The first rule for any debt strategy is to
Be sure you can pay the minimum on all your debts.
Once that condition is met, there are two strategies you can follow. The first is called the
Debt avalanche.
or the Western Front method. Imagine these dolls are your debts, arranged by their interest rate, with this little guy representing your lowest interest and this fat bastard representing your highest interest. The main objective of the debt avalanche is to first eliminate, i.e. pay off, your most dangerous debt, or the one with the highest interest. After you make the minimum payments on all your other debts, you gather your remaining income and attack your strongest debt. And attack it, 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 and attack it until finally you pay it off. When you neutralize your most dangerous debt, go after the debt with the next highest interest. When that's done, move on to the next highest. Rinse and repeat until finally you have paid off all your debts. The debt avalanche is the most logical method for paying off debt. Mathematically, eliminating the high interest rates first will cost you less money in the long run. The downside is the debt avalanche is a war of attrition. If the debt with the highest interest also happens to be your largest debt, trying to pay it off first can be demoralizing. Constantly throwing your money at the balance and barely seeing any change may feel like you're hitting your head against a brick wall. And like the British and French soldiers trying to break through the Hindenburg Line in the glorious year 1917, it may only be a matter of time before your morale crumbles. This brings us to the second strategy for paying off debt, the
Debt snowball.
popularized by mainstream financial guru Dave Ramsey. Ramsey? You magnificent bastard, I read your book! Again, imagine these dolls are your debts, but this time they're not arranged by interest, but by the total amount owed. This tiny little guy is your smallest debt, and this giant asshole is your largest debt. Of course, you know all this because you used your f***ing awesome spreadsheet to organize your debts.
F***ing awesome spreadsheet.
Similar to the debt avalanche, the debt snowball assumes you have enough money to make the minimum payment on all your other debts and cover your necessities. But instead of throwing your remaining money at the largest debt, you're taking on the smallest debt. Hopefully, you should be able to pay off your smallest debt in a short amount of time. When it's paid off, gather your available income and go after the next smallest debt, then the next and the next. With each debt paid off, your confidence and available resources grow, like a snowball rolling downhill. Like the cowardly Western allies attacking the soft underbelly of Europe in 1943, you should be able to score relatively easy victories. Studies from Harvard Business School and Northwestern University show that people who use the debt snowball are more likely to get out of debt. But this strategy has its downsides. The main disadvantage is that while you grow stronger with each debt paid off, so do your larger debts. Depending on their interest rates, the larger debts can substantially grow over the time it takes you to pay off the smaller ones. So, over the long term, the debt snowball costs you more money. So which one is best? Well, it depends on you. If you're the mythical consumer who makes all of their financial decisions based purely on
Reason.
and
Logic.
the
Debt avalanche.
is the best choice. If you're like the rest of us and feel overwhelmed by your financial situation, you want any kind of victory you can get. So the
Debt snowball.
is your best choice. But the unspoken truth is that even if you have the absolute best strategy, paying off debt, like winning a war, depends a great deal on luck. And unfortunately, luck may not go your way. The cards may be so stacked against you that no matter what you try, you can't seem to get ahead of your debt. When conventional warfare isn't enough, it may be time to consider among middle-class petty bourgeoisie, no word is more feared, more taboo than bankruptcy. Because for middle-class petty bourgeoisie, bankruptcy is a sign of failure. And we couldn't agree more. Bankruptcy is a sign of failure, but not of the individual, of the system. According to the American Journal for Public Health, over 60% of U.S. bankruptcies are related to medical expenses or being unable to work because of injury or illness. So, in the United States, you are most likely to go bankrupt simply by visiting a hospital. Now, we communists pride ourselves on our ability to sacrifice millions of people for socialist ideology. But damn America, way to value the free market over human life. Bankruptcy is a code of laws that provides relief for people who are in more debt than they can handle. Depending on which chapter you choose, the court may discharge your debts, meaning you no longer have to pay them, or it can reorganize your debts, meaning a bankruptcy judge creates a payment plan for you. Now again, due to time constraints imposed by the Ministry of Information, we're not going into too much detail about the complexities of the American bankruptcy system. If you want to get a better idea how bankruptcy works, we recommend you visit the American Bankruptcy Institute's website at
abi.org.
The main things we want you to learn are 1. When should you consider bankruptcy? 2. What chapter of bankruptcy should you choose? And 3. The cost of bankruptcy. So let's begin with the question no debtor wants to think about.
When to consider bankruptcy.
Now, some personal finance experts take the position that bankruptcy should be avoided entirely. Now, we communists aren't known for moderation, but even we find that a little extreme. While we view bankruptcy as an option, we view it as the absolute last option. You should only consider it after you have attempted every tactic mentioned in this program. If you've tried negotiating with your creditors, forming a budget, looking for a second job, etc., and nothing has alleviated your debt, it's time to consider bankruptcy. Yet even if you are at the uttermost end of need and feel bankruptcy is your only option, we still recommend that you talk to a credit counselor affiliated with the National Foundation for Credit Counseling, whose website is at
nfcc.org.
Remember, once you file for bankruptcy, there is no going back. So before pressing that big red button, consult a credentialed, well-reviewed professional. If you decide to file for bankruptcy and a licensed credit counselor agrees, you come to a fork in the road because you need to choose between
Chapter 7 or Chapter 13.
Bankruptcy is divided into different sections, or chapters, that offer a variety of debt relief. The two most commonly used chapters are
Chapter 13
and
Chapter 7.
The main difference between Chapter 13 and Chapter 7 is what debts they're used for. Chapter 13 deals with secured debt, i.e. home mortgages and auto loans. Typically, people file for Chapter 13 when they're trying to save their house.
Chapter 7.
Bankruptcy deals with
Unsecured
debt. If you're facing enormous medical bills or don't have enough income to make even the minimum payments on your credit cards,
Chapter 7.
bankruptcy is what you turn to. Side note, student loan debt isn't covered by bankruptcy, so sorry college graduates, you're SOL. When you file for Chapter 7, you list all of your income and assets and present this list to the court. The court then sells off any non-exempt assets to satisfy your creditors. Then it discharges your debts, meaning you no longer have to pay them. You are now free to move on with your life, but since you use the nuclear option, you have to deal with the
fallout.
The reason we say bankruptcy should be considered as a last resort is because bankruptcy has a very toxic impact on your financial future. Now, it's not as horrible as some experts say, but it's still pretty horrible, especially for your credit. Because you're not an idiot, you can guess filing for bankruptcy sends your credit score into free fall. Although, if you were so behind on your debt payments that bankruptcy was the only option, chances are your credit score wasn't great to begin with. Another reason bankruptcy is so toxic is the stigma stays with you for a long time. Information about your bankruptcy remains on your credit report for 10 years. So if you're looking for a new job, hiring managers will know you filed for bankruptcy. Now, under the law, companies technically aren't supposed to discriminate against people for filing bankruptcy. Although, technically, police officers aren't supposed to execute black people. Finally, bankruptcy's biggest drawback is that it's expensive.
Huh?
Yes, bankruptcy is expensive. The court fees alone cost several $100s, and consumer bankruptcy attorneys charge over $1,000 to file a
Chapter 7.
case, which is the cheapest case to file.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and if you ever call me Shirley again, I'll have your entire family
Re-educated.
Wouldn't it be cheaper for me to file bankruptcy without a lawyer?
Yes, but try a thought experiment first. Imagine the confusion and frustration that comes from filing your own taxes. Now, times that by 1,000,000, and add the added stress of being constantly harassed by creditors. Ask yourself, can I fill out endless government forms without making a single error? You better, because even the tiniest mistake can get your case thrown out of court. Studies show that people who try to file bankruptcy without a lawyer are 10 times more likely to get their case dismissed, without any protection from the court. Bottom line, if you want to successfully declare bankruptcy, it's going to cost you over $1,500. And that's what you call
Kafka-esque.
But hopefully, you don't have to resort to bankruptcy. Through grit, determination, and plenty of hard work, you can overcome debt. And then you can move on with your life, knowing what you went through was complete and utter bullshit. Because debt is bullshit. And the way we talk about debt is bullshit. When we talk about debt, and let's face it, personal finance, we focus only on success. We portray climbing out of debt as a great triumph, proof a person can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But having to pay off thousands of dollars of debt isn't success, it's failure. Not the debtor's failure, but society's failure. The same way war is society's failure. When millions of people are killed for the political aims of government, society has failed. When millions of people have to declare bankruptcy simply because they're sick, society has failed. But still, this broken system continues to march on. Why? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but the big reason is that a majority of us don't want to talk about our financial struggles. And that's not just my opinion. Surveys show that money is the topic people are least likely to discuss, meaning we'd rather talk about our religion, our sexual kinks, and our politics before talking about our money. Because regardless of which race, gender, sexual orientation, disability, religion, or combination thereof has it worst in the United States, there is one common denominator. It's shameful to be poor in America.
It's also shameful to be rich in America.
As I was saying, it's shameful to be poor in America. And capitalist pigs want us to be ashamed of being poor. They want us to be silent about how the system has failed us because as long as we're silent, the system doesn't have to change. And we're willing to be silent because Most of us don't want to be crybabies or whiners. We don't want to be vulnerable because vulnerability is weakness. Look, I'm going to break kayfabe here and tell you, I don't know how we solve this. But I do know we can't start fixing the problem until a majority of us admit there is a problem and start talking about it. But I guess the only way I can encourage people to do that is by throwing myself over the barbed wire and telling you about my debt experience. Not as Comrade Rourke, but Brian McIntyre. The reason debt is so scary is sort of like when I was in debt, like every day that I was in debt, I would think about like what's going to go wrong today? What's going to be the thing that like what happens if I'm like at my job and I get injured, I roll an ankle or I break my leg, I'm going to be stuck up in my home for a while. I can't go to work, I need my wages to pay off debt. How's that going to build up? Like, or you think about, oh, what if I do something wrong and then I get fired from my job or whatever? And it's always the same kind of thing where it's sort of like you never feel secure when you're in debt. You always feel like there's some kind of like, I guess the best way would be like Damocles' sword hanging over you, and it's sort of like this thing that won't ever leave you alone, is like the shadow that's always kind of following you, and you're always just afraid. Kind of the worst couple days of when I first was in debt was like, well, I mean, it was when I first got into debt, when I first like graduated from college and I had like, oh, I have $50,000 worth of student loan debt to pay off now. Oh, and I don't work at a job, and I work at a job that I can't really afford to pay student loan debt off. Like, I don't know. I feel like I internalized the stress a lot during those early days, and it was definitely it felt like a fall from grace a little bit, like sort of like in Paradise Lost, like Lucifer falling from like heaven or whatever and ending up kind of like in hell is how I would describe it. And like every day just worrying about how am I going to pay this off? How am I going to pay this off? And I actually got like really sick, like in the first couple months that I was out of college. Like I had like a bad fever during that time. I was scared to eat actually, because I was scared that I would need the money. So I lost like an unhealthy amount of weight, and it wasn't like a good weight loss. It was like I got scarily skinny at that time. And a day in the life of an indebted Brian. Well, it depends on which job I was working. So, I mean, basically I would get up and it would be just like any other day, but you know, it would always still like at some point during the day, like I would go through two emotional spirals, I think would be, and they would vary on like their intensity or whatever, depending. It would be like, basically it was just sort of like, from varying degrees, I would go from like depression to anxiety pretty much, just sort of like, well, everyone's doing better than I am. Oh, well, I'm just gonna plod on. And then the other thing is like, oh God, what is going to happen now? What's terrible thing is going to happen to me that's going to ruin all my plans and make me homeless or anything like that? Or I don't know, how will my life spiral out of control now or whatever? So that was there wasn't really ever a day where I didn't kind of go through those things, those emotional states to varying degrees. Dumbest thing I would do in debt is when I worked at like stressful jobs or anything like that, like I kind of yo-yoed between like, oh, I'm on my poverty diet where I'm just sort of like I'm not eating anything, to when I finally got some money, I would, because I was stressed and I was, it's still kind of the same thing. I wasn't eating right, basically. So like, let's say I was working at the post office at the time, and so I would go over to like a fast food place and get like a 1,000-calorie burger or something like that with like a giant order of fries and like a milkshake, and I would just eat all of that. And yeah, no, it would have probably been more logical to just, you know, not do that kind of thing and save that money for debt. But like at the time, I didn't care because I was stressed and my emotions were taking over and I was hungry, and and upset usually during the time. So yeah, I would probably just stress eat. Makes me angriest about debt is basically feeling or getting the impression from other people who've never been in debt or who are wealthy that, like, because you're in debt, you're a bad person, you are, I don't know, not even human or whatever, you're a lesser human or whatever like that, because how could you be so dumb as to get into large amounts of debt or whatever? And I think that's kind of a thing where people who talk about like that or talk that way about people who are in debt haven't really had that experience, so they don't really know what they're talking about, and they don't really know, or they try and give advice and just sort of like, well, do this or do that thing or blah blah blah, and it's just like you don't know what it's like to be in debt. You don't know what it's like to always constantly kind of be afraid of what's going to happen, and if something bad happens to you, you're screwed. My advice to people who are in debt right now is to be kind to yourself, to forgive yourself, to understand that just because you are in debt, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. But also, I would tell you that maybe, yes, the system is broken, and I'm not saying that it's not broken, but I am saying that you can find a way out. You can work hard, and if you do make the right decisions and you commit yourself to trying to get out of debt, I think the way is, like, sometimes the pieces just fall in place. But mostly the main thing is that be kind to yourself.
Produced in collaboration with Fort Collins Public Media. If you have any questions, comments, or death threats, please email us at communistfinance@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter at Comrade Rourke.